And we're going to move directly on to the next item in the program. We are honored to have with us the Secretary of the Smithsonian Institution, Wayne Clough.
Thank you, Ray, and thanks all of you for coming today and taking part in this important discussion with us. I really enjoyed that panel discussion. As Secretary of the Smithsonian, I do get a fair amount of mail every day, and quite a few of the folks send me mail, actually express some of the sentiments we were just hearing. Why am I not represented in the Smithsonian? And in deference to my distinguished colleagues here who represented an important part of our world, a number of those letters come from people called women. And so there is this question for us, particularly at the Smithsonian, is how do we reflect the Americans as a whole? Those were wonderful questions that we heard, and I want to speak to that and give you some thoughts that we have on that. Not that we have all the answers. Hopefully we can develop them together. But it's particularly great to be here in this museum with its great director, Kevin Gover, who've given me the opportunity to participate in a number of ceremonies here in this museum, which are always very inspiring. Not long ago, I came here to help him unveil that totem pole that's out there in the Potomac atrium. It was a fantastic demonstration of native art and storytelling by David Boxley and his family, who finished the piece right here in front of our delighted visitors. And they did it in a way, incidentally, your discussion about the negative side of the story and the positive side of the story. For many years, probably 100 years, his tribe was prevented from actually carving totem poles. And so this was a celebration of the art and the storytelling that we have restored. It was my pleasure actually to meet David 2 years ago, where he and his family performed native dances in the opening of the First Peoples Alaska exhibition in the Smithsonian Arctic Studies Center located in the new wing of the Anchorage Museum. I would encourage you to go there. It's a fantastic exhibition. The Smithsonian worked with elders of the clans there to choose 600 of our artifacts from the Natural History Museum and from this museum to create that exhibition. And it's now on long-term loan. It's a great educational resource, not for just those who visit Anchorage and that museum, but for the Native Americans who live there themselves. Now back here in Washington, of course, hundreds of people were in this museum when that totem pole was unveiled, and we brought the ceremony using a live webcast to David's village in Alaska. In a heartbeat, we had in a way bridged the span of an entire country from one coast to another, from one generation to another, and from one culture to another. Now, this is one example, as Conrad was saying, where technology can help us use modern resources to achieve our goal of what we call reaching new audiences. By using the latest technology, we can bring information about all Americans to every American. But we understand that just building a great technological platform to physically do that doesn't mean that we know how to tell the story. That's a whole another ballgame, and that's what museums are all about. And we're trying to learn, and we will take any advice that we can get along the way. Now, this symposium provides an avenue for discussing and debating important questions. Questions for our nation, its museums, and especially for this great institution, the Smithsonian. And I do want to thank our colleague Richard Curran and others who worked in putting this program together, for all our participants who've been with us in our audience. And of course, I'd like to especially thank our Smithsonian Regent who was here, Javier Becerra, for being with us. He is our conscience on the Smithsonian Governance Board on so many issues. I think it's reasonable to ask all of us here, why are we holding this symposium, and why now? Let me try to answer these questions at least from the Smithsonian point of view or my point of view. When Richard Curran and Claudine Brown, our Assistant Secretary for Education, and I first began to discuss this idea, it struck me as particularly important for the Smithsonian as we seek to chart a new course for this venerable and magnificent institution. In 2010, we adopted a new strategic plan that was developed in a new way for the Smithsonian. 1,500 people participated in developing that plan, including people who were not in the Smithsonian community. And by federal government rules, we were required to consider the next 5 years, but we emboldened ourselves and looked out 50 years and 500 years and even 1,000 years. Because if we're lucky, this institution, like many great institutions in the world, will be here 1,000 years from now. So we try to consider these key megatrends. You can't predict the future, but just to get a sense of it, and clearly the changing ethnicity of our nation, which is rapidly moving towards a population where there is no majority, was one of those clear factors. And we concluded that the Smithsonian truly, in the future, wanted to be a national museum. We had to recognize that much of the necessary preparation for that role has not been done. And we have a lot of work to do to even get close. So that meant changing the nature of our collections, becoming more inclusive in our viewpoints and the way we expressed ourselves through our exhibitions, and walking the walk in all of our daily activities. The 1,500 people involved in this planning process came to agreement on 4 grand challenges that should drive our future, 2 of which were called understanding the American experience, 1. Secondly, valuing world cultures, because so much of what we do in this country is derived from other cultures. So both of these really relate to the matter of how cultural and ethnic differences shape who we are and how they play out in the context of being an American. We also agree that through new approaches to our museum exhibitions using digital technology, we would do our best to reach new audiences and broaden access. As Eduardo said, many of the members of the Latino community simply don't come here. And that's a shame. We have to reach them. Now, I grew up in the Deep South, and kids in the Deep South typically haven't come to the Smithsonian either. Poor kids, like my family. Latino kids in East Los Angeles or Native American kids in small village in Alaska don't think of us. But our goal is to offer learning experiences to help them mature and broaden their horizons. Now, this is an ambitious agenda, and this is one of the selfish reasons we convene this meeting, is to learn from leaders and from those of you participating in the audience about how to do this, because we don't know all the answers. As to the matter of why it's important to do this meeting now, I would argue this is a critical time for museums to take on a larger role in our society. Never before has society needed our content so much. Never before has there been such an opportunity to deliver it outside of the walls of our museum as well as inside. And schools and teachers are crying out for our help. We need to step up to this challenge now, I would say, because if we don't, our nation will be lesser for it, and we'll have missed once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. So thanks to all of you who have participated in this meeting today. Now, I'd like to use the remainder of my remarks to speak to what we're trying to do at the Smithsonian to implement the vision of our strategic plan, but I think first I'd like to make just a couple of comments about why it's important to me personally. I grew up in the Deep South. It was a segregated time, and I attended Georgia Institute of Technology for my undergraduate studies in the early 60s. Fortunately, in my freshman year, that university took it on itself to desegregate voluntarily and get on with it, and in fact aggressively recruit African Americans into the student body. Shows you what one institution can do, because these actions quickly changed that institution for the better. Today it graduates the largest number of African American engineers in many science disciplines in the country. So Georgia Tech grew by taking on a leadership role in offering educational opportunity to all cultural and ethnic groups. And today, incidentally, it is a very diverse campus. The campus, of course, is in the heart of Atlanta, and the city and its elected representatives did something very smart. They embraced Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his movement. They even adopted a nickname, the city too busy to hate. And there's no question that Atlanta grew to be a great city simply because it embraced diversity. It took that opportunity and did it. Some of my heroes while I was at Georgia Tech were John Lewis and Andrew Young, men who later became my friends. And I saw up close what Lonnie Bunch says more eloquently than me, that the civil rights movement was not just about finding equality for African Americans, but about changing our nation for the better so it lived up to its ideals. Now, as a young man, also had the great opportunity and privilege to go to UC Berkeley for my PhD studies in the late 60s. It was an active campus at that time. I learned a lot in a lot of ways. But I encountered a campus for the first time where Asian Americans composed a large portion of the student body. In fact, we're on the way to becoming the majority of the student body. And it was there I really realized that diversity is a bigger thing than what I had perceived it to be in my childhood. And later in my life, in my opportunities to teach on the West Coast at Stanford, I became aware of the important work of Berkeley professor Ron Takaki, who I had the good fortune to meet when I was teaching there. A prolific author and influential historian, his book, A Different Mirror, expanded the story of American history to include the entire immigrant story. In his view, and I think you've discussed this, American history had been written into a master narrative that shut out the accomplishments of non-Europeans. And too often, that has been true in the ethic that was built into our universities and indeed our museums, and probably, we could say, the Smithsonian. As Takaki reminded us, the people who had typically been omitted from these history books, and still are to some extent, had minds, wills, and voices and lives that needed to be remembered. He advocated an approach for acknowledging that every story is important to the American mosaic. He personally broadened my understanding of what it meant to be an American, and it made it more meaningful for me when I understood that. And that really, these experiences underlie my commitment to cultural and ethnic diversity at the Smithsonian. The Smithsonian Strategic Plan calls for us to build from the ground up, but to try to work, I would call it in engineering terms, in parallel, so that we don't wait for one activity to be over to have to accomplish another. That's the problem that plagues institutions. How do you move quickly when you have major work to do? We're making progress, and I'll tell you it's made much easier for me because I'm surrounded by people who are committed to this subject. Now, I don't want to describe all the efforts we're making. They're pervasive, but I'm going to give you just a few things, just highlights. And of course, you can start right here with the work of this museum, which tells the story of the people who lived on this land before the Europeans arrived, and how the story evolved and changed in many ways tragically after Europeans came. Kevin and his colleagues are telling us compelling stories in ways that speak directly to some of the truths we need to hear. At the same time, they're informing all of us about cultures that brought enlightenment to all the world. Then there's our commitment to build the African American History and Culture Museum for $500 million. This is a lifelong dream of many Americans, and a challenge. It's a real big challenge for the Smithsonian to raise that kind of money and do the work that's necessary. We're raising half the cost of the work, and we're hoping the federal government will, in fact, give us the other half. We're truly fortunate, of course, to have Lonnie Bunch as our director. He's doing Herculean work to make this come true. And recently, we experienced the magnificence of the groundbreaking for that museum. It was an honor to be there with President Obama and First Lady and Congressman John Lewis, who said the museum was a validation of the dreams of generations. He was speaking, of course, for millions of people around the country, and I can tell you, there wasn't a dry eye in the House. Of course, you've read and heard of the proposal of the American Latino Commission, which was authorized initially by President Bush, and subsequently endorsed by President Obama, calling for the creation of a Smithsonian American Latino Museum. Our position on this proposal is that it's up to Congress to authorize any such major undertaking. But if they choose this course, we would be honored to undertake the challenge. And, of course, we hope they will provide the needed appropriations to make it happen. Beyond new museums, though, you can see our plan unfolding in the way we're broadening our exhibitions, and there are really, I would say, two ways that we're doing that. One is exhibitions that are directly addressed to particular topics, and others where, as Lonnie said, we're building in a larger viewpoint in our conventional presentations. The Art of the Gaman by the Smithsonian American Art Museum was about the internment camps and the Japanese who made art with nothing, fundamentally. It was very moving. Bittersweet Harvest, the Bracero program developed by the National Museum of American History and our traveling exhibition services sites. It was first exhibited in American History to a great response to that, and now has proven the most popular traveling exhibition we've ever had. We've had to duplicate it several times over to meet the demand. The Blacklist at the National Portrait Gallery, an exhibition of portraits of African Americans from all walks of life, was just concluded. And the Portrait Gallery, I think, was mentioned, just collaborated with the Smithsonian Asian Pacific American program, as Conrad said, to create a wonderful exhibition, Asian American Portraits of Encounter. And there are others, Slavery at Jefferson's Monticello, the Paradox of Liberty that Lonnie described. And that was a challenge to tell that story in a way, to engage people in the topic, but to give the slaves who lived at Monticello a human life, just as Jefferson had one, a human dimension. So we're seeking also to expand and enhance the work of Eduardo Diaz and Conrad Ng in the two programs that are essential to our future to help us continue to tell the stories as Ron Takaki said they should be told. Also related to this, and Eduardo referred to it as well, and this is an initiative Richard Curran, is to hire curators, and we are underway. We have the searches going, who come at their work from perspectives of different cultural viewpoints. And beyond the boundaries of our National Mall museums, we have other assets that are engaged in building this larger narrative about America. Music binds us in ways that help broaden our appreciation of many cultures, and our Smithsonian Jazz Masterworks Orchestra has performed, indeed, all over the world. And music can be flat out fun. Last summer, the Folklife Festival featured rhythm and blues, and the place was rocking. And it was an educational experience for everybody who came there. Now, other assets, I mentioned the traveling exhibit services that has traveling exhibits in all 50 states. And we have 171 museums in our affiliates museum, many of which are culturally specific museums. I've taken it on myself to try to visit as many of those as I can, and I can tell you it's very moving. I was just recently, of course, not necessarily an affiliate, but the National Mexican Museum in Chicago, Carlos is going to be on the next panel, was a fabulous museum. What resources these museums are for their communities. And we need to work with them and find ways to let them help us. Now, finally, I would mention a subject that I think is quite pertinent to some of the questions that were asked towards the end of the session, the larger pan-institutional initiatives that cross over the different museums at the Smithsonian and help us develop what we call our consortia efforts and our educational program. An example of the cross-disciplinary approach is a new initiative called Americans All. This is an effort of Claudine Brown and Michelle Delaney, who chairs our coalition, our consortium on the American experience. It brings together a number of museums and research centers to document and interpret the history and culture of immigration and migration in the United States. And we partner with organizations like Ellis Island Foundation, the Angel Island Foundation, and universities and museums to build the core resources that we will need to do this major work. We will use social media so people, as Lonnie was describing for his museum, can tell us their stories, and that will form one of the core resources for the research, for the exhibitions, and for the educational materials that we will develop to try to tell this larger narrative about our country. Now, education is one of our Smithsonian's most important missions as well, and we created the Office of Assistant Secretary of Education for the first time at the Smithsonian under the directorship of Claudine Brown, who you'll hear from later. We wanted to create a robust base for education that spans all of the Smithsonian, and we have been fortunate to receive a $30 million endowment grant from the Gates Foundation to fuel the work to reach new audiences and broaden access. Under Claudine's leadership, we now have over 20 funded programs, cross-disciplinary programs, across our museums and reaching outside of our museum to develop education programs that we never had before and deliver them to audiences we've not done before. We are working with partners to scale our work. We simply don't have the capacity. We don't have the money or the capacity to scale our work. So we're working with an organization called ePals. It's been a great partner for us to give us access to 700,000 schools all over the world. And in the course of last year alone, over 70,000 downloads were made by teachers of Smithsonian content. Now, there are bigger numbers out there, but 3 years ago, that number would have been 0. We're now reaching 70,000 teachers, and 3 years ago, we weren't reaching those teachers. It tells you just how fast that is changing. Social media, of course, are opening new doors as well. We have over 500 or 600 social media sites now, at the Smithsonian. I'm told we have 2 million Twitter and Facebook followers. I thought that was a big number until I read the newspaper the other day, and Lady Gaga has 22 million. So we know we have work to do. She set the bar up high. We'll try to. But when our newest resident arrived at the Stephen Udvar-Hazy Center last week, the Space Shuttle Discovery, enthusiastic fans joined with us in celebration of this magnificent event. Facebook and Instagram went kind of crazy, and in just the first 24 hours, over 10 million people were engaged in sharing the celebration of the arrival of this amazing spacecraft that had flown 148 million miles. I was on the dais with Charles Bolden, the first African American to permanently head NASA, and Eileen Collins, the first female to command the space shuttle. It occurred to me how diverse the people were behind the shuttle program and how we can use the Discovery to tell the story of diversity and its contributions to our country. In 2002, the first member of a Native American tribe orbited the Earth, Chickasaw Nation astronaut John Harrington. On his historic flight, he took with him a number of items: a flute, eagle feathers, and a Hopi ceramic pot. Now those items are part of the collections here in American Indian, symbolizing the myriad collections between art, science, and history and culture, between creativity, diversity, and innovation, between the earth, the sun, and the skies. We believe the Smithsonian can spark excitement and inspiration to learners of all ages, whether with totem poles, pots, or spacecraft, and whether to decide to become the next artist like Davis Boxley, or the next NASA administrator, who is one of our African American heroes, or go anywhere else their dreams take up in flight. We're committed to doing it. We have a long way to go, and we look forward to your help as we try to accomplish it. Thank you very much for inviting me.